Anti-Korean sentiment in Japan has existed for centuries. Over time, these sentiments seem to have shrunk by a considerable amount, primarily due to increased immigration and globalization. However, despite societal progression discouraging xenophobic beliefs, the Japanese internet has created an environment for these ideas to thrive. One website in particular, 2chan, has led to anti-Korean sentiment rising online and has had impacts in far-right political groups beyond the country's border. In order to break down this topic, though, we need to go back in time to 1999, to the birth of one of Japan's most popular forms of social media. Chapter 1. The birth of 2chan. Hiroyuki Nishimura was a Japanese international student at the University of Arkansas. He believed that the internet back in his home country had a flaw. It was tame. Sites had rules about what could or couldn't be posted, and the government required all explicit content to be censored. This wasn't the case in the United States. Here, the internet was the Wild West. People were free to say and host what they wanted, as long as they abided by copyright. Even then, sometimes they didn't. As an international student, Nishimura thought, what if there was a way around the Japanese government's rules and explicit content? What if you could provide Japanese users an internet without rules, even the ones mandated by the government? Then the idea struck him. What if he hosted a site meant for a Japanese audience outside of Japan? That way, Japanese law would have little authority because the data simply isn't stored in the country. He decided to create an anonymous text board with this concept in mind. Text boards like this are nothing new, but the anything goes attitude of Nishimura's site would be what set it apart from its competitors. As the release of the site grew closer, Nishimura needed a name. He wanted the forum to operate almost as a second, more open channel to the more popular message boards at the time. So he named the site 2chan. Over the next few years, the site grew in popularity, and by 2002, Google had reported that 2chan was one of the most commonly looked up terms on Japanese search engines. By 2007, it was making more than 100 million yen per year, with 2.5 million posts made per day. So how does the creation of a popular social media site link to the rise of anti-Korean sentiment and xenophobia? Well, think about the website I just described. It's the perfect place for hate to spread. It has a large user base, so ideas can be spread quickly. It has an anything-goes attitude, so there's little moderation. These factors made it perfect for far-right groups to settle down and begin spreading anti-Korean sentiments. And the data supports this. In 2021, Daisuke Tsuji conducted a study about internet use in Japan and how it polarizes xenophobic views. Polarization is the concept where one's beliefs become more and more extreme over time. It doesn't make a person believe something entirely foreign to them, instead strengthening their already present beliefs through confirmation. Tsuji found that Japanese people using the internet as a source of news speeds up this process greatly. While it's important to note that 2chan itself is not actually mentioned in this study, people use the website as a way to share information and link articles that confirm their beliefs all the time. This, alongside with the other factors mentioned, presents the idea that the existence of 2chan has led to the growth of anti-Korean sentiment online. This goes deeper than a single study, though. There's evidence to show that this website has fostered growth of a whole new right-wing ideology, known as the Neto Uyoku. Chapter 2. Neto Uyoku and the Rise of Korean Hate on the Internet. Neto Uyoku is a portmanteau of Neto and Uyoku, meaning internet rightist. In common discussion, it's shortened to the word Netuyo. The origins of the term stem back to the 90s, but it didn't reach the peak of its popularity until 2chan exploded in the 2000s. Painting a picture of your average Netuyo is difficult. Getting accurate demographic data from the internet is tricky, but according to a survey done by Nippon.com, a considerable amount of Neto Uyoku self-identify as male and are on average 40 years old. They live primarily in urban areas, with most having degrees and making the higher than medium income for their age. While specific beliefs of the Netuyo vary from person to person, there's a common theme of hyper-nationalism and historical revisionism. This directly ties into the previously discussed anti-Korean sentiment. The days of the Japanese Empire looked back fondly, with atrocities like the Kanto and Nanjing massacre either denied outright or seen as justified. Even beyond these historical situations, the Netuyo seem to carry a distrust of Koreans into our modern-day society. Users often complain that Korean nationals were taking Japanese jobs, being a nuisance, and are overall inferior to Japanese. Obviously, these posts are incredibly bigoted, but on 2chan, they were the norm, not the exception. It's here that another element of 2chan as a website comes into play. 2chan's user base is entirely anonymous. On social media like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, people may not post their thoughts or beliefs because it could be traced back to them in the real world. This lines up with scientific research on internet aggression. If people feel like they're being anonymous online, they'll be more encouraged to behave aggressively. It's reasonable to say that on 2chan, that anonymity is a contributing factor to the formulation of the netuyo, as they could say things that are socially unacceptable in a lot of cases and not be punished for it. So far, a lot of emphasis has been placed on the netuyo's online behavior, but 2chan's impact goes beyond just the digital realm. In the past, 2chan has been used to spread not only anti-Korean information, but plan real-world action. One particularly notable example of this happened back in 2011, when thousands of people protested outside the headquarters of Fuji TV. Back in 2011, Japan was in the middle of what's called the Korean Wave. This is a period in Japanese history where Korean pop culture was popular within the country. K-pop idols were all the rage with young people, and Korean television shows like K-dramas were being aired on Japanese television. Due to their popularity, they had a certain block of the day that was dedicated to just showing Korean television. And when you think about it from a TV-making perspective, it's easy to see why. You're not actually paying to make these shows, you're just paying to syndicate them from another country and possibly subtitle or dub over them. When you factor all that in, the cost of producing an hour of Korean television versus the cost of a domestic television show are incredibly reduced from the Japanese side, making the profit so much larger. Add that onto the fact that Korean television was also incredibly popular, so more people were tuning in to see whatever ads and sponsorships they placed. Many people, however, weren't fans of this practice, especially those who already held anti-Korean sentiment. The practice of airing Korean dramas had been increasing for a decade or so at this point, but there was one particular point that sparked the protest. An actor by the name of Sosuke Takaoka made a Twitter post criticizing Fuji TV. He said that he turns them off whenever Korean dramas are on. He was then fired over the tweets, and that caused people to protest. It's here that another important element of the netuyo needs to be highlighted: their distrust of the news media. The book International Alt-Right actually has a section all about the netuyoku and their similarities with Western, quote, alt-right groups, unquote. The book says that, quote, both movements depart from the establishment right and decry the politically correct mainstream media's positive coverage of minorities and migrants, unquote. With this in mind, it's easy to see why the netuyo weren't happy with Fuji TV's choice of programming. Attendance at the protest was not only physical, but digital as well. News reports say that a live stream of the protest had more than 100,000 people watching online. People made posts on 2chan rallying their support, and one person even wrote a song with this title, which when it translates says, Kimchi TV, the rate of foreign ownership is abnormal, or something along those lines. I just use Google Translate. This, of course, is referencing the Korean dish of kimchi, and the video is a censored version of the Fuji TV logo. This song alone has nearly 300,000 views, and that's only on YouTube. That's not counting the views on Nico Nico or other Japanese video streaming sites. So in summary, this vehemently anti-Korean protest was planned on 2chan and were emboldened by users so passionate about the idea of Koreans not being on television, they created a song about it. This also isn't the only situation where 2chan has caused an uproar over Korean portrayal, but if we went over every single one, we'd be here all day. Even after the aforementioned phase of the Korean wave ended, the anti-Korean sentiment and distrust for legacy media has continued, and that xenophobia ended up colliding with Japanese politics as well later down the line. Chapter 3. The impacts in Japan and beyond. Conservative political commentator and manga artist Yoshinori Kobayashi once posted in his blog, quote, netuyo are like Shinzo Abe's Red Guard, unquote. The word Red Guard in this case is referencing a student group turned paramilitary organization who championed the ideology of Mao Zedong in China. The Red Guard were literally die-hard fans of Mao Zedong and criticized and attacked anything and everything they saw as against their leader. While comparing the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to Mao Zedong is certainly a bit of a stretch, the comparison of the netuyo to the Red Guard reveals an interesting question. How do traditional politics relate to the netuyoku? Well, for starters, many of them loved former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and it's not hard to see why. Like the netuyo, he was a historical revisionist. He denied the use of Korean comfort women and was very much against mainstream media, which, as we discussed, was one of the major beliefs of the netuyo. This all raises a really fascinating question. Do the netuyo actually have an impact when it comes to Japanese politics as a whole? Could an argument be made that Abe's political success is partially from his support from the internet right? Well, the answer from academics seems to be a resounding shrug of the shoulders. It's really hard to determine how much of Abe's voter base was made up of netuyo versus how much just voted for the LDP as they always did. Still, according to this article, there was a large movement of Netanyahu who ran disinformation campaigns against his opponents. These opponents also ended up losing. While the role their support played in Abe's election is hard to quantify, it brings to light another piece of the Netanyahu puzzle, and that being what exactly their limits are. Sure, their hate speech is widespread online, but at the end of the day, that's all it is, speech. In an article discussing Netanyahu, the Asian Pacific Journal said, quote, "While they are extremely vocal online and clearly identifiable as a discursive group, when it comes to real-life political actions, Netanyahu's involvement is limited to occasional net-driven phenomena such as dentotsu or phone attacks, matsuri, sudden or extreme concentration of postings, and enjo, a rush of accusatory comments on SNS sites, targeting left/liberal opinions and sites," unquote. Still, those words can have a chain reaction, and nothing makes that more clear than Netanyahu's impact on the rest of the world. Yes, this primarily Japanese group has actually had a tangible impact outside of the country. In 2003, a man named Christopher Poole had a similar issue to Hiroyuki Nishimura back in 1999. He wanted a place to talk about anime and manga online, but as an English-speaking American, he wasn't exactly welcome on most of the traditional forums. Well, to solve that, he decided to make his own website, inspired by his favorite online forum, 2chan. He quite literally used 2chan's source code to make his own website, and he even named his new site after 2chan, calling it 4chan. It had the exact same base concept as 2chan, with no rules, total anonymity, and a simple site layout, except this time, it's in English. Well, just like 2chan, the site got extremely popular. Not as popular as 2chan initially, but it had enough of a success to create a sizable community of its own online. And again, just like 2chan, the politics were more heavily weighed towards right-wing extremism. Anti-Korean sentiment was replaced with white supremacy and anti-Semitism. A Western version of the Netanyahu began to emerge from these forums, and they were given the name the alt-right. If that word sounds familiar, it absolutely should. It's the ideology behind several cases of domestic terrorism in the past 20 years alone. Plans for January 6th and other acts of violence were encouraged and discussed on 4chan before they were actually carried out on the date. 4chan itself is a huge can of worms in terms of politics, its impact on modern culture, and of course domestic terrorism, but the fact of the matter is this: a prominent internet forum that has been used to plan out acts of terrorism is directly modeled and based off a singular Japanese website. While this video is primarily about Japanese politics and 2chan, it can't be denied that 2chan's popularity and the Netanyahu as a political group have set off a set of dominoes that has drastically altered the shape of American politics for the foreseeable future. January 6th alone was a huge part of Trump's campaign to be reelected back in 2024, and in some small way, the actions of the Netanyahu and 2chan are somewhat responsible for the creation of the site it was all planned on. And that leads us to conclusion: the future of 2chan and Netanyahu in Japan and the rest of the world. This entire conversation leaves us with a question: what does the future hold for the Netanyahu? Well, while 2chan and boards like it have seen a decline in searches according to Google Trends, it still remains active as a form of social media. 2chan's Western sibling, 4chan, has had spin-offs of its own, each with its own varying levels of success. Despite that decline, though, 2chan likely won't be going away anytime soon. It's still being used for pop culture discussion and political ideologies almost every single day. Furthermore, the ownership of 2chan and 4chan have shifted hands multiple times, and now Hiroyuki Nishimura, the original creator of 2chan, owns and operates 4chan, the Western alternative. He's essentially ditched the declining Japanese site and switched over to a more popular Western site that's inspired, let's say, more extreme action. Despite everything, though, there is a silver lining, and that's the messaging. While anti-Korean sentiment still exists online, in the real world, the data shows that it's beginning to dip. According to the East Asian Institute, Japanese and Korean citizens have become more amicable to the idea of a bilateral relationship in the past 3 or 4 years, and immigration within the country of Japan has also continued to rise, and the increased number of foreign nationals entering the country would make an isolationist ideology like Japanese conservatism very, very difficult. While it's impossible to know what the future holds for sure, there's hope for a kinder and more loving tomorrow for both these cultures.